Okay, I'd like to review Act 3 of Julius Caesar today. At the beginning of Act 3, we have Artemidorus and the soothsayer waiting for Caesar in the street. And Artemidorus has written a letter to Caesar that tells about the conspiracy and actually names the conspirators. And of course, the soothsayer is also going to, again, try to get Caesar to listen to him about the Ides of March. When Caesar goes by Artemidorus, Artemidorus tries to give him the letter and tells him that it's of closest concern for Caesar. And Caesar then says, well, you know, what's of close concern to me will be last. In other words, he's more concerned with the good of Rome and that sort of thing than he is of his own personal concerns. So he does not read the letter immediately. Then the group enters the Senate, and Metellus Cimber tries to convince Caesar to allow his brother Publius Cimber to come back to Rome. He's been banished from Rome. I don't know why, but Julius Caesar banished him from Rome, and all of the senators start trying to get him to change his mind about this. And this is really just a ploy. It's just to keep Caesar's attention forward so that if someone comes behind him, he won't even notice them. Well, Caesar refuses to change his mind about Metellus' brother, and that's when he makes his speech about where he compares himself to the northern star, saying he's as constant as the northern star. And at that point, as I said, they're all around Caesar's feet. Another person has taken Antony aside. Trebonius has taken Antony aside away from Caesar to keep him occupied so that he cannot defend Caesar. And then Casca comes behind Julius Caesar and stabs him first. They all start stabbing Caesar, and the last one to stab him is Brutus. And according to the play, Caesar's famous last words are, "Et tu, Brute, then fall Caesar." And that's something you need to know. And at that point, he falls and dies. And then the conspirators start running around and, saying that this is a victory for liberty and that they have in fact acted as friends to Caesar because they have shortened his life so that he doesn't ever have to spend more time fearing death. So they are just beyond reason at this point, thinking that they've done something great. And Brutus then encourages everyone to bend down and bathe their hands in Caesar's blood. Now this was foreshadowed in Calpurnia's dream. So this is the fulfillment of that foreshadowing. So they proclaim peace, freedom, and liberty. And at that point, Antony's servant comes into the scene because Antony has run away and gone home to hide in safety for the moment because he could see when they were killing Caesar that he was far away from Caesar, and not only that, it was just he himself against all these senators. He knew he could not defend Caesar, so he went home. Now his servant comes back and requests that now that Antony has heard of Caesar's death, knows that Caesar's dead, he wants to know whether they will harm him if he comes back to talk to them. And they say, oh, of course we won't harm you. Antony needs to come back so that we can explain to him why we've done what we did. And Brutus then thinks that they will, of course, be able to make Antony one of their allies at this point, and he won't turn against them. However, Cassius is not so sure that that's the case. Antony comes in at that point, and he gets very upset when he sees Caesar's body. They say that he says to the conspirators, if you mean to kill me, just do it at once. and because there's no better place to die than beside Caesar. But they say, don't, that's not going to happen. We don't want to kill you. We have no reason to kill you. We want to be friends with you. And then Antony pretends to be friendly with them, and he shakes everyone's hands, and he shakes Trebonius's hands last, and he says that he's not last, he's last but not least in love. In other words, he does not care less for Trebonius because he shook his hand last. Okay, and at that point, Antony is still upset about Caesar dying, but he says he does want to be friends with Cassius and with Brutus and all the other conspirators, as long as they explain to him why Caesar needed to be killed, why Caesar was dangerous. And then Antony asks if he might bring the body of Caesar to the forum for the funeral oration, and Brutus consents, but Cassius says, don't let him carry the body in there, and don't let him speak at the funeral. But Brutus wants to let Antony speak at the funeral, and he says, no, it'll be all right as long as I speak first, and then Antony can speak after that, because when I speak, I'll explain to them how Caesar was overly ambitious and how he was dangerous for Rome and he had to be killed. And then everyone leaves except Antony, and Antony is like talking to Caesar's body and asking him his pardon for being gentle with the murderers. But then he also makes a prophecy that this is going to cause civil unrest, and that there will be a huge war, and he will be seeking revenge. Okay, Antony has promised that if he speaks at the funeral, he will not blame the conspirators. Okay, and so Antony really means to keep that promise literally. He's not going to be blaming them. However, he does have intentions of stirring up the crowd and getting them to be against all the conspirators. Okay, at this point where Antony is with Caesar's body, Octavius's servant enters, and Antony tells him to return to Octavius and tell him not to come into Rome just yet, and that he will let him know when he may come into Rome, because he doesn't want him to get hurt or get involved in what's going to happen. Okay, in scene 2, Brutus and Cassius are entering the forum, and they are going to do their speeches for the funeral. And Brutus gets up and talks about how he loves Caesar, but that Caesar was just too ambitious, and he was dangerous for Rome, and therefore he had to be killed. And that even though he loved Caesar, his love for Rome was even greater than his love for Caesar, and so he was bound to do this for Rome. And the crowds actually go along with this, and they support Brutus, and they seem to understand the whole thing and go along with it. And all the people, when Brutus says, does anyone disagree with me on this, they don't disagree. And then at that point, Antony enters for his time to speak, and he carries Caesar's body in with him. And Antony gets up to the pulpit and does his funeral oration. And he does several things that get the crowd upset. For one thing, it's just carrying the body in and letting them see this body that's all hacked up. And he says that the conspirators are honorable men. And he says this many, many times, and he says it somewhat sarcastically. And he'll say, well, Brutus says that Caesar was too ambitious, but I offered him the crown 3 times and he wouldn't take it. Is that being too ambitious? And then he will go on to say, but I'm sure it must be because all of these men are honorable, and they wouldn't have done this unless they had good cause. And then he also cries in front of the whole crowd. And then he points out the different places on Caesar where he was stabbed by various conspirators, actually naming them. And all these things he's doing in order to get the crowd riled. Then he talks about Caesar's will and explains how generous Caesar was, and that he's giving his gardens for the public to walk through and enjoy, and that he's giving to each Roman citizen 75 drachmas, that's money, from his will. And all these things, the crying, the pointing out the different injuries, and the talking about the will and how Caesar loved the people and how he willed all of these things to them. That, along with the sarcastic way of calling these men honorable, all of those things are meant to cause chaos and to get the citizens to not be for the conspirators anymore. Even though Brutus's speech made them support them, Antony's speech completely gets rid of that feeling, and they all start wanting to kill the conspirators and whatnot. Okay, Antony pretends like he wants them to settle down and not cause any problems, but of course he does, because everything he's done has been in order to start that chaos. So after Antony gets done speaking, all of the citizens are leaving, and a group comes upon Cinna the poet, and he is not the same man as Cinna the conspirator. Okay, but because he has the name Cinna, the crowd, who is just vengeful and wants to kill somebody and wants to get back at someone, actually attacks him even though he's explaining who he is, and they kill him simply because he has the first name as one of the conspirators. Okay, I think those are the important things that were in this. And make sure you know the quotations that are in Act 3, because at least one of them will be on the quiz, and I hope you do well.